When I turned 70, I threw a party for my family. No one came. Saying it out loud still sounds like some cruel joke. But to me, it was the truth. A truth colder than any winter in California, the place I had lived my whole life. I had spent weeks preparing, meticulous as if it were the final celebration of my days. I thought I had calculated every detail, from the food and the candles to the old Navy suit my wife once loved. Yet the house sank into silence. Only me, the grandfather clock on the wall, and the empty chairs. Are you here? Stay with me until the end of my story and leave a comment with the city where you are watching so I can see how far my story travels. I began preparing 3 weeks earlier. People often say that at this age, all you need is a simple meal and a few warm wishes. But I didn't believe that. I wanted a moment to look back, to sit with my son, Michael, his wife, Vanessa, my two little grandchildren, Liam and Sophie, and the few friends still alive after so many years. I called each of them, confirming they were free on Saturday evening. I even wrote it down in my old notebook, afraid my aging memory might betray me. The menu was not fancy, but it carried all my heart. I roasted a Southern-style chicken the way Michael had begged me to make when he was a boy. I prepared mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed with butter and garlic, and an apple pie from Linda's recipe. Linda, my wife, had been gone for more than 10 years, but every time I opened her recipe book, her handwriting seemed alive again, gently reminding me to add a touch of cinnamon to the apples for a richer flavor. That morning, I stood before the mirror longer than usual. I put on the navy blue suit Linda used to say made me look like a gentleman, even though I was only a high school history teacher in Riverside. I tucked a white pocket square into the breast pocket and combed back my silver hair. I wanted my grandchildren to remember their grandfather as someone dignified, not just an old man shuffling through the backyard garden. My house glowed that day. I bought fresh flowers for the dining table, carnations and yellow chrysanthemums, Linda's favorites. I placed 8 chairs around the table, polished the silverware, and spread a crisp white cloth. I wrote name cards carefully, the way I once graded my students' essays. Michael's card went beside mine, Vanessa's next to his, Liam and Sophie opposite me, so I could see them clearly. The room filled with the smell of roast chicken and pie. At 6 o'clock, the clock chimed. I sat at the head of the table, my heart racing like a child waiting for birthday gifts. I lifted my head at every passing car, certain it was my son pulling in with his family. But minute after minute slipped by, and still no knock on the door. I checked my phone, checked the calendar. Saturday the 12th, 6 in the evening. I had reminded everyone 2 days before. By 6:30, worry set in. I dialed Michael. The line was busy, then went to voicemail. I tried Vanessa, no answer. I called my sister Ruth, who had promised to bring her favorite salad. No one picked up, only the tick of the clock filled the house. The chicken is cooling in the air. By 7, I was pacing around the table. The candles I lit at 6 had burned low, wax dripping into glass cups and hardening in frozen trails. The apple pie sat untouched on the counter, its golden crust gleaming. My chest grew heavy, like an unseen hand was gripping tight. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe the car broke down, maybe traffic, maybe something urgent came up. But deep inside, a cold voice whispered, "Not this time, Walter. This isn't a chance." By 8, I knew they would not come. I sat staring at the empty chairs. Each one was a cruel reminder that I had been left behind. I wanted to cry, but old men's tears don't come easily anymore. Instead came a shiver running down my spine. I blew out the candles quietly, afraid to watch the light die as if it mirrored my place in this family, fading away. I sat for a long while before I made the mistake that opened the door to everything that followed. I unlocked my phone. I opened Facebook, something I only used to look at my grandchildren's photos. And right there at the top of the feed, I saw the picture. Michael, my son, grinning wide in a white shirt, one arm around Vanessa, the other holding up a glass of wine. Behind them stretched the endless blue sea, the sky burning with an orange sunset. The caption read, "Living life to the fullest with this wonderful family on our Miami trip. Grateful for every moment." My heart stopped. I scrolled. A photo of Liam and Sophie building a sandcastle. A photo of Ruth and her husband raising cocktails on a ship deck. All of them, everyone I had waited for tonight, were there together, celebrating, and not one of them had said a word to me. I looked at the clock, 8:15. The pictures had been posted less than an hour ago. While I sat before a cold dinner, they were raising glasses thousands of miles away. My chest tightened. It felt like the ice on a winter lake cracking wide, shards splintering beneath me. This was not forgetting. This was planned. Vanessa had arranged a trip for my birthday. Michael went along, Ruth went along, and I, the man who had taught my son every lesson, who had pulled my sister through every hardship, was left in a house glowing with light and filled with silence. The phone buzzed. A message from Michael. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Sorry, Dad. Forgot to tell you we were going to Miami this week. Vanessa booked it as a surprise. Happy birthday. Forgot to tell me. A trip like that could be forgotten." I set the phone on the table, afraid I would smash it to pieces. I walked into the kitchen, turned off the oven. The chicken was stone cold. I wrapped the apple pie carefully, placed it in the fridge. I put away each plate, each fork, the clink of porcelain echoing hollow in the air. The silence was so deep I could hear my heartbeat. Each thud was like a hammer nailing down the truth. I had been cut out of my family. Not a missed date, not an oversight, a decision. And I was the spare part. When I turned off the dining room light, my reflection stared back from the glass door. An old man in a suit, gaunt face, empty eyes. I had once been the keeper of birthdays, the host of Thanksgivings, the one who bought every Christmas gift. But tonight I realized a cold fact. After 70 years of living, this was the first time I truly became invisible in my own family. I sat in the silent house after that empty birthday dinner, and the memories came rushing back, relentless as waves crashing against the shore. They say that at 70, memories outweigh tomorrow, and I believe they are right. Every moment of that night dragged me backward into the years when I was still a husband, a father, a teacher, and above all, a man who believed family was everything. I had spent most of my life in a small house in Riverside, California. This house, the one I am still sitting in, was once the warmest fortress I knew. I was a history teacher at Riverside High for more than 35 years. It was not a job of wealth or fame, but I was proud of it. I always believed that if I could make students see history not as dry numbers, but as the story of people, then I had done my duty. I loved those mornings at the blackboard, chalk dust on my sleeve, telling of battles, of migrations, of men and women who dared to change their fate. Perhaps that is why I never felt lacking, because the love of students and the respect of parents filled my life. But teaching was only one part of it. The most important part was Linda and Michael. Linda, my wife, was a nurse I met at a blood drive the school hosted. I remember clearly that day she laughed and said, "Harris, you speak about war like you actually lived in it." I laughed, and she said my voice could make people believe anything. We married after 2 years of dating, then came Michael. The day he was born, I held him in my arms and felt as if I had been handed a responsibility greater than any history I had ever taught. We were not rich, but we had each other. Linda worked night shifts at the hospital, and I taught during the day. When Michael was little, we traded shifts, sometimes cradling him while preparing lesson plans, or feeding him while learning how to mix medicine for patients. Those were busy, exhausting, but beautiful years. I remember Linda falling asleep on the couch, too tired to move, and Michael crawling over to pull a small blanket over her. Those images are etched in my heart, proof that happiness needs no grandeur, only enough love and devotion. Then Linda fell ill, breast cancer. The news cut through our quiet lives like a blade. I still remember the morning after the doctor told us, when Linda held my hand and said, "You must promise me, no matter what happens, you will raise Michael into a man." I promised. And when she left this world after her long fight, I kept that promise with every ounce of strength I had. After Linda passed, I set aside all personal dreams. I could have written a history book. My students once encouraged me to write, could have traveled with colleagues, but I didn't. I stayed home, focused on Michael. I became his father, his mother, his friend. I taught him to drive, to knot a tie, to apologize, to keep his word. Every summer, I took him camping at Lake Tahoe, taught him to light a fire, to pitch a tent, and listen to his stories from school. In his eyes and smiles, I still saw Linda, and I believed I was not alone. When Michael grew up, I thought my promise to Linda was fulfilled. He earned his engineering degree, got a stable job, and married Vanessa, a woman I once believed was gentle and capable. When Liam and Sophie were born, I found new joy. I became a grandfather, pouring all my love once more into little ones. I walked Liam to preschool in the mornings, holding his hand as we crossed the street. I told Sophie fairy tales before her naps. I taught them how to tie their shoes, how to read star maps when camping. Each time they called Grandpa Walt, my heart warmed like fire. I never feared growing old. I felt useful, still a vital part of the family. On Christmas nights, I sat with them by the fireplace, reading a Christmas carol, and I could almost see Linda smiling somewhere in that room. But then the cracks began to show. At first, so faint I told myself they were coincidences. One year I prepared Halloween treats for Liam and Sophie, but Vanessa texted, "The kids are out with friends, maybe another time." One Thanksgiving, Michael said work had sent him away last minute, so dinner was only me and an unroasted turkey. Another year, Christmas, they invited me, but at the last minute, Vanessa said Michael had the flu. Better not come or I might catch it. Then I saw photos on social media, all of them around the tree, smiling, everyone there except me. Once, I promised to take Liam to a Little League baseball game. I had bought tickets, picked out his favorite team shirt. That morning, Vanessa called. "Sorry, Dad, Liam has an extra class. He can't go." I folded the shirt, forced a smile. But that afternoon on TV, I saw the game, and there was Liam in the stands, sitting beside his mother. I remember Sophie's birthday. I had saved up for a carved wooden doll, brought it to their house. Vanessa opened the door with polite smile. "Oh, not a good time. Sophie is resting. Maybe later." I went home with the gift still in my hands. That evening, I saw photos of a birthday party glowing with lights, a tall cake, and a dozen children. Sophie smiled brightly, but I was not in the picture. Slowly, I began to see the pattern. Each time I planned something, there was always a reason to keep me away. Each time I hoped, there was a last-minute change. But I kept comforting myself. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe old age made me too sensitive. Maybe Vanessa meant nothing by it, just busy or careless. I repeated those words until my heart ached less. So I kept trying, kept waiting. I brushed away the hurt, still knocked on Michael's door each weekend, still brought little gifts for the kids, still believed that someday they would need me again. I never thought someone might be deliberately cutting me out of the family picture. I only believed that after so many sacrifices, blood would hold us together. Until that 70th birthday night, when I sat before a cold dinner, and that faith was shattered completely. After that 70th birthday night, when the whole table sat empty, I never looked at life the same way again. Once the heart is cracked open, you begin to see the fractures you once chose to ignore. I realized those so-called coincidences, year after year, had never been accidents. They were deliberate. But I did not choose anger, did not storm over to my son's house to shout in bitterness. I had lived too long to know that rage only proves others right when they whisper the old man is losing his mind. I needed another way. I needed silence. But the kind of silence that keeps records, gathers evidence, and prepares. I started with the smallest things. Whenever Vanessa sent a message canceling plans, I saved it. One time she wrote, "Sorry, Dad, Sophie has a slight fever, so better not to come today." I kept that message, but later that night on Facebook, I saw Sophie in a pink dress, spinning happily at a classmate's birthday party. I did not comment, did not reply. I took a screenshot, printed it, and tucked it into my notebook. Another time I called Michael on a Saturday, asked him to go fishing, like we used to when he was young. He hesitated, then said, "Sorry, Dad, this weekend Vanessa booked doctor appointments for the kids, and we'll be busy all day. I wish them well." But that same afternoon, I saw photos of the family at a Dodgers game, smiling on the stands. I screenshotted, printed, and added another page to the file. Gradually, I built a thick stack, full of fragments that told a clear story. Each time I wanted to be present, Vanessa had a reason to push me aside, replacing me with moments where she stood at the center. In every photo, I was never there. I realized Facebook, which I once used only to see my grandchildren, had become the sharpest mirror of my disappearance from my own family. At first, I thought I might talk to Michael directly, but every time I called, I could hear Vanessa in the background, adjusting his tone, slipping in small corrections. Michael always ended with the same line, "I'm too busy, Dad, maybe next week." I understood then, if I confronted them head on, my words would be twisted into more proof that I was paranoid, unreasonable. One Sunday afternoon, I sat on the porch, the May breeze stirring my gray hair, when Robert, my longtime friend, stopped by. He and I had taught together at Riverside decades ago. He often brought a cheap bottle of whiskey and two paper cups and sat with me to talk. That day, I told him about the birthday, about the times I had been left behind. Robert stayed quiet a long while, then sighed. "Walter, you can't just sit here hoping things change. People don't forget you that many times by accident. This is deliberate. If you want the truth back, you need to prepare. You need a lawyer." I gave a bitter laugh. "A lawyer for family." Robert shrugged. "Not to sue, to protect yourself, to make sure you have evidence, so that when the day comes, you won't be turned into a fool." His words haunted me for days. I had never imagined needing a lawyer to deal with my own son. But one night, as I sat staring at the pile of printed screenshots and unanswered messages, I knew Robert was right. I could not sit idle waiting for kindness to return. I needed another path. So I went to see Nora Green, a retired attorney living a few blocks away. She was 10 years younger than me and was once known for her blunt honesty and fairness. When I handed her the stack, she read every page in silence, her eyes steady over the faint ink and colored photos. At last, she looked up and said, "Mr. Harris, what you have here is not the illusion of old age. This is a clear pattern of behavior. Someone is deliberately dimming your place in the family, but remember, confronting too soon will backfire. You must be patient. Gather more. Let the truth build its own weight." I nodded. Inside me, sorrow mingled with resolve. I knew I could not change Michael overnight, could not pull him from Vanessa's grasp with accusations alone. But I could prepare. I could gather each shard of truth until one day they formed a picture no one could deny. From then on, I bought a large wooden box and placed it under my desk. I called it the Box of Truth. Every message, every screenshot, every printout from Facebook went into it. I wrote dates in red ink, added short notes. I collected every mismatch between words and actions, every small but cutting detail. The box grew heavier, and each time I opened it, I no longer felt powerless. I felt I was quietly preparing for the day to come. Outwardly, I stayed silent. I still smiled when I saw Vanessa, still nodded at her explanations of busyness. I did not blame Michael, nor did not burden my grandchildren. I let it all play out as if I had accepted my fading role. But inside, I was watching. I was writing a new history, not with chalk on a classroom board, but with scraps of paper proving my life was neither confused nor fading. Some say silence is weakness, but I know silence can also be a weapon. A cold patience, waiting for the right moment to reveal its strength. And in this house, among Linda's old photographs and the ticking of the clock, I began my journey of silence, a journey I knew would end in a reckoning no one expected. One Tuesday morning, the Riverside sky was grayer than usual. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee gone half cold when the doorbell rang. At 70, I no longer had many unexpected visitors, especially on quiet mornings. Neighbors usually waved from a distance, and close friends always called first. I hesitated, then stood and walked to the door. At the gate stood a man I had never seen. He looked to be in his 40s, with black hair flecked with gray, clothes neat but rumpled, as if he had just come from a long trip. He carried himself with tension, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes darting until they landed on me. "Are you Walter Harris?" His voice was low, cautious. I nodded. "Yes, that's me. What do you want?" The man drew a long breath, speaking slowly. "My name is Daniel Ortiz. I need to talk to you about your family, about your grandson, Liam." My chest tightened. The moment I heard Liam's name, an instinctive alarm shot through me. "You know my grandson." Who are you? Daniel bowed his head, then looked up, pain and determination flickering in his eyes. Please let me come in. I know what I'm about to say will be hard to believe, but you need to hear it, and I have proof. I let him step into the living room. The space still smelled of old oak and a trace of lavender from the diffusers Linda once loved. Daniel sat on the sofa, hands clasped, trembling slightly. I poured him a cup of fresh coffee. He didn't drink. He only stared at the steam and then spoke. Mr. Harris, I believe Liam, your grandson, is my biological son. The words hit the air like a stone shattering still water. For a moment I was frozen, heart pounding hard. I stared at him, trying to decide whether I was facing a madman or a man carrying a truth I never imagined. What the hell are you saying? My voice broke as I tried to steady myself. Daniel opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick envelope, and slid it toward me. This is a dye report. I collected Liam's hair at a barber shop near his school, where I happened to see him. I compared it with mine. The results show a 99% probability that he is my son. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The print was clear, the conclusion undeniable. I read it again and again, hoping my fading eyes had misread, but the words cut sharply. Liam was not blood of the Harris line. Why? Why would you think this? How do you know Vanessa? My voice rasped. Daniel leaned back, eyes distant. I was with Vanessa for nearly 2 years before she married your son. Back then, she used her real name, Vanessa Martinez. We lived together in San Diego. She told me we would marry. I planned a life with her. Then she said she was pregnant. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. I was overjoyed. I thought it was the start of a new life. But within weeks, she vanished. No goodbye, no note, no trace. Her belongings are gone. I went to the police, hired a private investigator, and searched everywhere. Nothing, as if she had evaporated. Cold ran through me. Memories began stitching themselves together. I recalled Michael's rushed wedding to Vanessa. They had known each other for 6 months before marrying in haste. I once felt proud believing my son had found great love. Now it looked like nothing but a calculated deception. Daniel continued, I was broken, but life had to go on. I thought maybe she'd ended the pregnancy. But 3 years ago, on a work trip to Riverside, I saw a boy. He looked so much like me that it stopped me in my tracks. The eyes, the walk, even the small scar on his chin. The same scar I had from falling off a bike as a child. I froze. Then I learned he was the son of Michael and Vanessa. From that day, I couldn't sleep. I had to know the truth. I closed my eyes. Liam's face rose in my mind. I remembered holding his hand, crossing the street, remembered his eyes crinkling shut when I taught him to tie his shoes. Now that same smile mirrored the man sitting in my living room. Are you certain, Daniel? Could there be a mistake? My voice was faint. He shook his head, gaze unwavering. I tested twice at 2 different labs. Both gave the same result. Liam is my son. I set the papers on the table, my hands still trembling. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Questions hammered my mind. What had Vanessa done? Had she used this man's child to trap Michael into marriage? All these years, had our family been living in a lie? Daniel leaned forward, urgency in his tone. I didn't come here to destroy your family, Mr. Harris. I don't want to rip Liam away. I only want you to know the truth. I want my son to grow up in a home not built on deceit. Vanessa fooled me, and I believe she fooled your son too. I stared at him, rage and helplessness twisting inside me. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had endured, dismissing her coldness as dislike for her father-in-law, now revealed herself as a cold strategist. All those years, I told myself her excuses were accidents. The truth was far worse. Every move had been deliberate. I remembered Linda's eyes in the hospital when she made me promise to take care of Michael for the rest of my life. I had kept that vow, raised him into a man, but now he was trapped in a marriage built on sand, on lies from the very beginning. I felt like a man who had broken his word. Daniel rose slowly, placed a hand on my shoulder. I know this is hard. It took me years to face it. But now you have proof, and you must decide. Stay silent, or use this truth to save your son. When he left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the stack of papers. Afternoon light streamed through the window, shadows of the words stretching across the wooden table. What lay in my hands was more than paper. It was the key that could alter Michael's life, my grandchildren's lives, and the rest of my own. For the first time in years, I felt my silence breaking, and I knew there was no turning back. I spent many sleepless nights before sending the message to Michael and Vanessa. I chose calm, simple words, leaving no trace of what I held inside. I'd like to invite the family for dinner this weekend. After what happened on my birthday, I think we need a meal to bring us back together. Short, plain. But I knew it would strike at Michael's conscience, because he always hated the thought of family breaking apart. Vanessa replied faster than I expected. Yes, Dad, we'll be there. I could almost picture her face as she typed it. Surely calculating, surely suspicious, but she couldn't refuse. I spent the day preparing. I polished the old wooden table in the dining room, laid out Linda's porcelain dishes, and smoothed the navy tablecloth until every crease was gone. I cooked Michael's childhood favorites: beef stew with carrots, mashed potatoes, and Linda's old apple pie recipe. Everything had to be perfect. I wanted the moment to feel like a warm family dinner, but also like a formal unveiling of truth. On the shelf, the wooden file box sat locked and waiting. It would stay there until the moment arrived. That evening when the bell rang, I drew a long breath before opening the door. Michael walked in first, Liam trailing behind with mud on his sneakers. Vanessa came last, smiling just enough, her eyes scanning the room as if to be sure everything was still under her control. Wow, Dad, you really went all out, Michael said, a touch of relief in his voice. It's been a long time since I cooked for everyone, I answered, steadying my tone. Dinner began in a sweetness too polished to be real. Michael asked about my health. Vanessa kept fussing at Liam to sit straight, and every so often she corrected me on the salt, the oil, as if I were some clumsy old man. I only smiled, nodded, patient. Inside, I could hear the clock ticking like a countdown. After the main course, as the apple pie landed on the table, I rose quietly. I lifted the wooden box from the shelf and set it in the center. Vanessa stiffened, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Michael frowned. Liam stared with curiosity, not yet old enough to grasp what was unfolding. This is why I asked you here today, I said, my voice cutting through the brittle calm. I opened the box. One by one, I laid the papers out. DNA results, copies of Vanessa's old records, bank statements I had gathered. Vanessa's face drained of color. Dad, what is this? She forced a smile, but her hands shook. I held her gaze. Or should I say, Sophia. I spoke the name from her past, the name Daniel had revealed. It landed like a blade. Michael's head snapped toward her, stunned. What? Who's Sophia? His voice cracked, disbelief tightening it. Vanessa drew in a breath, tried to steady herself. That was long ago. I changed my name when I was young. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. I pushed the file toward Michael. This is a DNA test. Liam is not your son. He is Daniel Ortiz's child. Vanessa knew it, yet she still married you. She built this family on lies. The air shattered. Michael froze, his eyes locked on the numbers, his face crumbling as the truth sank in. Liam looked from me to his parents, confused, still shielded from the cruelty of adult betrayal. Vanessa shot to her feet, voice trembling. It's a lie, Daniel. He's jealous. He made this up. I stayed calm. If it's made up, why do these records exist? Why did you run from your past? You used Michael as cover, and you erased me because you feared I would find out. Her words stumbled, her eyes darting, desperate for an exit. But Michael had seen enough. He slammed the file back on the table, his hands shaking. I want an explanation. Right now, cornered, Vanessa pleaded. I did it all to protect this family. I didn't want you to leave me, and I didn't want Liam to lose his father. But her words fell cold and useless on the tile floor. Michael shoved back his chair, rose to his feet. You betrayed not just me, but Dad and Liam. All these years. His voice broke. He couldn't go on. I sat still, watching as if a long game of chess had reached its final move. I didn't need to speak again. The truth stood bare, undeniable. The numbers, the documents, and one old name had brought down the wall of lies that had stood for years. When Vanessa collapsed into her chair, covering her face, I felt nothing but emptiness. Had I won or lost? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I was no longer invisible. The truth was out, and it would change us all forever. I sat back in the wooden chair, my hand still resting on the open file. The air in the dining room grew thick. The only sound the clatter of silverware when Michael dropped his fork onto the floor. I didn't look at Vanessa, but I could hear her breathing hard, fast, as if she were cornered. Michael was the first to break the silence. "Dad, where did you get these?" His voice was hoarse, his eyes red after reading the papers I had laid on the table. The DNA test, the bank statements, the old records with Vanessa's true name. I didn't answer right away. I laced my fingers together, sat up straight, and kept my eyes calm. My words didn't matter anymore. The papers had already spoken. Vanessa was the one who finally broke, her voice catching. "Michael, don't listen. He's trying to destroy our family. He's hated me for years. Don't believe any of this. It could be fake." Michael turned to her, face twisted between rage and disbelief. "Fake? Then why is your name on the records? Why don't you explain?" Vanessa burst into tears, mascara streaking down her face, smudged from the makeup she had touched up before dinner. She stammered, then screamed. "You don't understand. I just wanted a family. I was afraid of losing everything. I didn't have another choice." I watched in silence. The scene was bitter, but not surprising. I had spent years teaching children how to face the truth, and now it was my own son who was learning the lesson no textbook could teach. Michael slammed his hand on the table. A glass of red wine shattered, bleeding across the white cloth like a wound. He shot to his feet, eyes boring into Vanessa. "Why? How long have you lied to me? Liam, whose child is he?" Vanessa stepped back, her chair screeching across the wooden floor. She hid her face in her hands. Her silence was the most brutal answer of all. News spread faster than the wind. Within days of that dinner, relatives and neighbors knew. I overheard whispers at the market, in the cafe, even at the small library where I read the paper. Vanessa lied to her husband. The child isn't his. Poor Michael, trusting all his life only to learn the truth now. Michael began to sink under the weight. He no longer came to greet me in the mornings, no longer drove to work with pride on his face. I saw him sitting alone on the porch, his hands clutching his head, his eyes empty. He was remembering his mother, remembering how Linda and I raised him, and realizing the truth, that I had been cut out of the family for years. One night he came into my room, eyes raw. He didn't say much, just whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. I let them turn you into an outsider." The words pierced me like a hand squeezing my heart. I didn't blame him. I only nodded and said softly, "What matters is that you finally see." During those days, I didn't need to shout, didn't need to argue. Truth carried its own weight. I stayed silent and let them see what I had endured. That silence became the pressure Vanessa could no longer bear. One morning I heard an engine outside. I stepped onto the porch and saw Vanessa dragging a suitcase, her hands trembling, her eyes swollen. Liam stood in the doorway behind her, confused. Michael didn't stop her. He stood at a distance, his face cold as stone. Vanessa looked back at me once, her eyes burning with anger and despair. Then she rushed to the car and drove away. The house fell into chaos and silence at the same time. Liam cried in the living room, and Michael collapsed into a chair with his face in his hands. I walked slowly, placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't push it away, didn't speak. But I knew in that moment he had begun to awaken. For the first time in years, I felt I was no longer invisible. Truth can be merciless, but it is also the only light that can pull someone out of the dark. And that day, when Vanessa vanished into the storm of her own making, I knew the tide had turned. I didn't need to defeat anyone. I only had to let the truth speak for itself. And it did. I was 70 years old, yet I had never truly lived for myself. My whole life had revolved around students, around family, and after Linda passed, I poured everything I had into raising Michael. When the walls of Vanessa's lies finally collapsed, I sat alone in a house once filled with laughter, but now empty. And for the first time in decades, I asked myself, "Walter, what do you have left that belongs only to you?" I did not choose bitterness. I had lived long enough to know resentment is the heaviest weight a man can carry. If I clung to it, my back would bend forever. Not from age, but from a heart with no room for relief. I began with what seemed like a small decision, but it changed everything. I left the townhouse in Lincoln, the place packed with too many memories and wounds, and moved to the little farm on the edge of town, the place Linda and I once dreamed we would grow old together. The land wasn't big, but enough to build a garden. I hammered in posts, stretched wire for tomato vines. I pressed potato seedlings into damp soil, letting my hands relearn the smell of earth. The smell Linda once called the scent of wine. Each morning, I slipped on an old checkered shirt, brewed a pot of strong coffee, and walked out to the garden. Sunlight poured through the branches, and I realized I needed no invitation to sit at a banquet of my own, the banquet of light, of wind, of soil. On long afternoons, I sat at a wooden table by the window, opened my old laptop, and began to write. I wrote about teaching, about the years in the classroom, about the poor children in Nebraska I once taught to read. I remembered faces, small stories, and set them down not for praise but to keep them alive, maybe for some future generation who might need them. I wanted to say this: a teacher never disappears. He lives in the words of his students, in the lessons of kindness passed on. Robert, my old friend, came often. "Walt, you should do more with what you know. Don't let it sit in your computer." His words stirred something in me. So we sat together, spoke with Nora Green, the lawyer with the sharp tongue and soft heart, and we built a fund. We called it the Legacy Foundation. The name sounded grand, but the meaning was simple: leave behind something good. The fund gave poor rural children books, small scholarships, and chances to step out of the shadows of want that I had seen too many times. At first, the fund was nothing more than a few $1,000s from my savings and Robert's help. But then former students found me. They said, "Mr. Walt, I remember when you drove me home after school when no one came for me." They gave what they could: a few dollars, a box of books, an old laptop. The Legacy Foundation took shape, and I saw myself alive again in the eyes of children I had never taught, as if I were meeting my old students all over again. Michael seldom spoke to me. He still carried the wound of Vanessa's unmasking, but what I never expected was Liam and Sophie turning to me first. One afternoon, as I dug the soil to plant lettuce, I heard a call at the gate. "Grandpa Walt." I looked up. Liam stood there, Sophie at his side, carrying a basket of apples. My heart clenched, then warmed. I had never asked them to call me that, never taught them to. But the words came as naturally as the breeze across the porch. From that day on, they came often. I showed Liam how to build a fire, Sophie how to plant seeds. I told them stories of when Linda and I were young, when Michael was a pea riding on my shoulders. They listened wide-eyed, giggled when I mimicked Linda calling me her stubborn schoolteacher. And in those afternoons full of laughter, I knew I was no longer invisible. 70, many think, is the end of the road. For me, it was another beginning. I no longer craved a seat at grand tables, no longer longed for recognition from kin who had turned away. I had my garden, my half-written pages, my loyal friends, a small foundation carrying hope, and the tender call of Grandpa Walt drifting across the porch. I sat there one autumn evening, the trees burning gold in the fading light, and told myself, "Walter, you were forgotten once, but now you live again." I understood then that the worth of a life is not measured by how many times we are betrayed, but by how we rise after each fall. I had once suffered in an empty dining room and once felt invisible within my own family. But now, at 70, I had found a gentler truth. No one can extinguish the light within us unless we let it go dark. And I chose to kindle it once more. I turned 70 and looked back on everything I had lived through. From that empty birthday dinner to the night I placed the DNA files on the table, to Vanessa's downfall and Michael's awakening. What surprised me most was not that I had defeated anyone, but that I had overcome my greatest fear. The fear of being forgotten, erased from my own family's story, reduced to nothing but a nameless shadow. The day Vanessa left, the house that had once echoed with false laughter fell as silent as a graveyard. Michael sat motionless on the porch, his hands trembling as he realized he had allowed his wife to cut his father out of their lives. I didn't need to add a word, didn't need to shout. The truth was strong enough to do its work. I walked quietly into the kitchen, cleared the dishes, and my heart was calmer than it had been in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone. Vanessa vanished from our lives like ink wiped off a page. I didn't know where she went, and I didn't want to. What mattered to me was watching Michael slowly relearn how to be a man, a father, and above all, a son who respected the past of his family. In the beginning, he was silent, his eyes sliding away when we crossed paths. But in time, Liam and Sophie built the bridge back. They came to visit, calling me with a name so simple and warm. Grandpa Walt. I realized then that sometimes it is the younger generation who mirrors the truth and who gives us the chance to begin again. I chose not to live in hatred. At my age, I know anger is like a sack of sand strapped to your back. The more you carry it, the heavier it becomes. I moved to the little farm outside town, where the soil still smelled fresh and the grass still whispered with life. I planted tomatoes, sweet corn, and lavender to let its fragrance drift with the evening wind. Some mornings I sat and wrote, writing about teaching, about those children long ago who once called me Mr. Walt with eyes bright as glass. I wrote to remember, and I wrote so that someone one day would know that life, no matter how dark, can still be lit with truth and patience. Robert and Nora helped me bring to life an idea I never dared to in my youth. Together, we founded the Legacy Foundation, a small scholarship fund for children in need. I offered my experience in education. Robert reached out to the community, and Nora gave legal guidance. Each time I saw the faces of students receiving help, I felt I was back at the blackboard with a stick of chalk in hand. But this time, instead of lessons in history, I was giving them the chance not to be left behind, the way I had once been left behind by my own son's family. In the late afternoons, Liam and Sophie often ran to the farm. Liam helped me pick tomatoes, and Sophie sat listening to my camping stories. When they called me Grandpa Walt, my heart softened. All the emptiness of that birthday table was filled with their laughter. That was what family truly was. Not perfection, but honesty. I learned that silence is not weakness. I didn't expose Vanessa to rage, didn't curse my son, and didn't lose my dignity in arguments. I sat still, held the truth in my hands, and let time finish the work. That silence cut deeper than any blade. It forced them to face their own conscience with no escape. People often think growing old means reaching the end. For me, it was a beginning. At 70, I was no longer the forgotten old man at the edge of a dinner table. I was a gardener, a teacher, a grandfather, and part of a community. I didn't need recognition. I only needed this presence to be seen. If you have stayed with me to the end of this story, perhaps you too carry an emptiness inside. It might be family, it might be friends, it might even be yourself. I won't tell you to take revenge, nor to forget. What I learned is this: truth and silence, when held together, can heal and reshape an entire life. Vanessa is gone. Michael is slowly growing into himself again. And I no longer fear being erased. I have won, but not against anyone else. I have won against the fear inside me. And sometimes that is the only victory worth keeping. There is one thing I want to leave with you, in the voice of a 70-year-old man sitting on his porch with a cup of hot tea, watching the sun fall behind the mountains. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It is the sharpest truth. If you have lived through betrayal, through loneliness, through the sting of your own family turning away, share your story. I believe that once it is spoken, you are no longer alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, journeys of silence filled with strength, subscribe to this channel, because the next story might just be the one you've been waiting to tell.